Scott made it to school just shortly before the bell rang and first period transitioned into second. He slipped through the crowded halls to the classroom, one hand gripping his little backpack he'd lazily slung over his shoulder, and the other hand clamped over his injured side. The pain was subsiding a bit now, but the fruit he had eaten minutes before was fading in him as if it had been nothing more than a shell with air inside. Definitely concerning, but as long as he wasn't starving to death, he figured he could wait on a checkup. He came into the classroom and found his friends sitting at their usual desks, taking a seat next to them, but sitting down slowly as not to provoke more discomfort from the bruise. Ava glared at him.
"Well, it's about time you showed up."
Ava? Tori put his hand on her shoulder. "Remember, I told you Scott's injured. Lay off him."
"Injured schminjured," she blurted. "He's a little punk, Tori. He just said that so we'd let him sleep in and not get all—"
Scott lifted his shirt a little and showed off the bruise.
"Oh, sweet Lord!"
"Yeah, that would be why I missed class this morning." He put his top back down. Tori was still staring in shock. "Oh, God. Scott, have you seen a doctor about that? I mean, wow, that could be a serious wound. I've never seen anything like—"
"Yeah, I know," he said, placing his palm over it again. "If it doesn't get better, I'll definitely go see one after school."
"Scott, you should see one right now." Ava stared at him with a concerned frown. "I mean, me and Tori can present ourselves, I guess. We would want you here, but wouldn't want you to, die or something." His eyes widened a little, and then he scratched his head. "Well, gee, it's not that bad, and it's certainly better than it was this morning." His friends looked at each other nervously, but the conversation ended when the teacher entered the room and began instructing. According to her, they'd have to read the chapter on environmental concerns and then answer some questions about it, and finally, after the questions, they would present the project. The chapter itself was easy, but after a few minutes the fruit, which Scott had eaten only a few minutes before, completely dissolved in his stomach and left his body begging for more food. At first he tried to ignore it, but the hunger gnawed at him for what felt like hours until finally the growling in his gut was so loud that Tori actually heard it and tapped him on the shoulder. "Geez, Scott, you sound like you're starving over there." Scott looked at him nervously. I do feel kinda... It's really like I don't know." Tori raised an eyebrow. "Did you skip breakfast?" He really didn't know how to answer him. Yeah, he'd had breakfast. He'd had twice breakfast, and yet his stomach felt like it would cave in from the hunger. He panicked in his head over the thought for a moment, and then finally decided not to let Tori get more concerned about him. Yeah, I might have skipped it this morning." His friend gave him a disappointed look. "You know you shouldn't do that, Scott. Like, even when you're not sick, if you don't keep up with yourself, your immune system can't fight like it should. You could end up even sicker." He jerked an awkward smile. "Or you could die or something." Ava, who was listening in, gave him a mean glare. "But all jokes aside," he reached into his backpack and handed Scott an energy bar he'd stashed. "You really should eat something." "Aw, man, Tori," he thought. It was nice of his friend to offer him something, but would it do much good? The toast and the fruit had lasted only a few minutes at most. Tori gestured kindly for him to eat it, and he finally complied and took the bar, peeled back the wrapper and wolfed it down about twice as fast as he had intended to. But almost instantly he felt it starting to disintegrate out of him. "What the frick is going on?" he thought as he sat up straight and tried to hide that there was something seriously wrong with him. "Maybe I really should go see a doctor. I definitely shouldn't be able to eat this much and still be starving." He looked weirdly at his waistline. "I shouldn't be able to eat this much and still be moving." He rushed the rest of the chapter and moved on to the questions, which became increasingly difficult as the energy bar completely dissolved and his stomach cried out for even more. Tori obviously heard it again because he asked Scott if he wanted another one. Knowing it wouldn't do much good anyway, he refused, which was a big mistake because after a few more minutes his stomach was growling so loud it was starting to disturb the other students around him, especially Tori, who was occasionally staring at him wide-eyed and concerned. So much for trying to hide it. After the class finished the questions, the teacher gave them a couple minutes to get with their groups. Tori and Ava moved their desks up next to Scott's, and they both gave him a concerned look. "Geez, Scott, I could hear your stomach growling from the back of the room. Did you skip breakfast this morning?" He said he did, and I gave him an energy bar, but it seems like it's just made him even hungrier. Scott put his hands up to show he was all right and put on his best cheesy grin. "Hey, don't worry about it, guys. I'm fine." They glared at him. "So there is something wrong with you?" Scott shrugged in embarrassment and was about ready to spill it, and probably about to be dragged to the doctor's, when the teacher announced it was time to present. Tori volunteered them to go first, and they got up and moved to the front of the room. But just before they were able to start the speech, Scott's stomach whined so loudly that the teacher heard it and stared at him funny.
"Are you all right, Scott?"
she asked cautiously. He started to answer, but then Tori interrupted with a loud, "He's unusually badly injured, and I think sick as well." The teacher rolled her eyes.
"Oh, how many times have I heard that? I swear if you keep making excuses like that, I'll—"
He lifted his top.
"Oh, sweet merciful heavens!"
Scott ended up spending most of third period in the infirmary. The nurse had about had a heart attack when she'd seen the size of the bruise, which was absolutely terrifying since it had actually gotten better since this morning, and about every test in her arsenal to diagnose the strange injury. In the end, however, the bruise was still dubbed, "We've never seen anything like this," and Scott was sent to lie down and rest. Of course, shortly afterward, the nurse realized the poor boy was starving and sent him to the cafeteria. Yeah, eating would definitely help calm his mind, although he was rather shocked at himself for only being mildly concerned over an injury that could make a trained nurse about pee herself with fear. Ha! Oh man, if only he could show it to the weak-hearted music instructor, after she'd passed out cold from seeing a cockroach on her desk. Oh man. He got to the cafeteria and got a couple of pocket pies, which were little crust pouches full of fruit that tasted like miniature pies. Then he picked a table, which was rather secluded from the main lunchroom, and stuffed them down his throat. As he expected, though, they didn't fill him very well. He went back and got a couple more, this time accompanied by a large sandwich, a few bags of chips, and a 2-pack of Mega Bubble soda, the soda with a twist of extreme. They went down surprisingly fast. A couple more trips, and the table was blanketed with food like an all-you-can-eat buffet, Scott stuffing down every bite and wondering how the frick he could still eat, or fit comfortably into his pants. Thank goodness the cafeteria lady had about the attention span of a dining room chair and didn't seem to notice it was the same guy coming back again and again. The weird thing was that, as the food drained from his stomach, the weird lump on the center of the bruise seemed to feel stranger and stranger. "Pretty hungry, aren't we, kid?" Scott jumped at the sound of someone talking to him and looked up from his snack. Standing in front of him was another kid that looked about 16, Scott's age, although he'd never seen the guy at school before. In fact, with hair like a thick, dark red wine and foreign-looking clothes that seemed as if they were designed by someone who either knew nothing about clothes or was an exotic design specialist, Scott doubted he was even from town. And how had he gotten there without being seen? He wasn't that distracted with the food. And Scott swallowed and then looked at the guy nervously. "I'm kinda, He realized he was looking pretty pathetic and put on a straight face. "You got a problem, guy?" The guy, without asking, took a seat directly across the table. "Nah," he crooned, "but I think you do." Scott looked at him in puzzlement. "Last night, you saw the red star, didn't you?" The guy pressed his hands on the table for balance and leaned in close. Scott pulled his hand back over the bruise. You saw it too?" "Yeah, I saw it. Wanted to catch it, but didn't exactly work out. You live in a 2-story house on the outskirts, right? You're the one it hit, aren't you?" He looked over at Scott's hand. "It's in your side, isn't it?" Scott stared at him in utter confusion. "The one it hit? It's in his side? What?" "You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you?" The guy sat back normally. "But you will soon, believe me. It'll only get worse if you don't do something." Scott shook his head a little and tried to snap out of it. What do you mean?" The guy smirked. "Hey, don't worry. I can help you. Just meet me at the lake after school and it'll all be over fast." Scott was about to ask another question when the lunch bell rang and the guy stood up suddenly, said he had to go, and left quickly through the nearest exit. He sat there pondering on what had just happened, but soon the hunger started to poke at him again and he returned to the food. Pretty soon the students had filtered out of their classes and rushed into the lunchroom. After the crowd, Tori and Ava managed to hunt him down at the secluded table. They stopped a little ways in front of it, and if their jaws hadn't been significantly well attached to their faces, they would have dropped clean off.
"What?"
Scott said obliviously, stuffing down another pocket pie. Tori blinked. Scott? Are you feeling okay?" "Never better," he replied sarcastically, finishing off the pie and breaking into a little cup of lemon yogurt.
"Oh,
Holy frick on a fruit muffin! Eva about lost it, staring at all the snacks her friend was scarfing down. That's enough chow to feed a family of 10 on Thanksgiving! Scott was getting a little frustrated now. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious. No, I don't know what's wrong with me either. He looked over the table. And I know it's a lot, but it's not that much. They sat down in front of him, and Tori clamped his hands together like he always did when he was really nervous. Scott, you wouldn't eat that much pregnant with triplets. You should really go see a doctor. I did, mid-second period. Kept me there almost all of third and couldn't find out what I have. I know what you have. A really deep stomach. Holy frick, Scott! Can it, Captain Frickin' Obvious? She's right, Scott. No normal person should be able to eat that much. Don't you think I know that? Scott packed in a bag of chips and another mega bubble. There's something seriously wrong with me. I get it, but the nurse doesn't know what it is. What should I do? Tori unclamped his hands and looked like he was getting serious. He got up from his seat and came around to Scott's side. Well, maybe the nurse can't tell, but maybe I can. He sat down and asked Scott to tell him the symptoms, which he did, and then Tori asked him to show the bruise again, and he pressed on it a little, much to Scott's discomfort, to see exactly what it was. After the examination, he moved back over to Ava's side and clamped his hands again. Yep, I don't know either, he said. Scott, it feels like you have a rock wedged in your abdomen. A rock wedged in me? Suddenly the words of the strange redhead he saw earlier resounded in his head. The star had hit him and was in his side. The cruel realization that it might actually be something like that dawned on him, and he couldn't help feeling at the bruise again. Now that he'd realized that thought, it did feel like there was a rock in there. But how? Why? What? He was about to try and tell his friends about the red-haired guy when suddenly they stood up and grabbed him by both arms. What are you doing? Taking you home. You need to rest, Scott. But Teach'll understand, Scott. You got something weird and serious. What I need to do is eat, which you can at home. Oh, please, your pantries are horribly overstuffed for one person. It was hard to argue with them. Yeah, they were right. He definitely needed to rest and try to recover. But if it really was a rock, was there anything he could really do about it, short of surgery? And how to get in there? Had that weird star really come down and hit him? His friends dragged him helplessly out the door and out of town to his little house on the outskirts. The whole time the words of the strange red-haired guy ringing around in his head. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? But you will soon. Believe me, it'll only get worse if you don't do something. Hey, don't worry. I can help you. Just meet me at the lake after school and it'll all be over fast.